Don't offload your mental capacities to a machine, and don't let a computer make your decisions for you. I think that's the main lesson from Philip K. Dick's book, Vulcan's Hammer. Hey, welcome to Truth Suffers. I'm Parker Settecase. I have a master's degree in philosophy and 2 master's degrees in theology, and this is a channel predicated on that ancient Fremen saying, truth suffers from too much analysis. So with that in mind, instead of just going over philosophy and theology, I'm going to teach you truth and wisdom through science fiction and fantasy. In this video, I want to cover some of the philosophy of Philip K. Dick's Vulcan's Hammer. So first, I want to give you a spoiler-free overview of the book. It's a pretty short little novel, but it started out as a novella in a science fiction magazine. I want to talk about that as well. And it was published multiple times by different publishers with different artists using different art for the covers, so I want to show you guys those. Then I want to talk about the artificial intelligence which is at play in the novel, and then I'll end by covering some of the philosophy inherent to the story. So I'll warn you when the spoilers come, but for now let me just give a spoiler-free overview. So Vulcan's Hammer is not considered one of Philip K. Dick's best stories, and that's probably because it's not super Phil Dickian. It doesn't mess with your sense of reality all that much. It's a pretty straightforward story, and it's about a giant answering machine, a giant huge computer that functions in the role of God. Philip K. Dick started writing the story in 1953. He finished it in 1954. I think this was published in 1955 or 56, and it was published as a novella. Look at the artwork here. It's so awesome. It does look a little bit like Robert Downey Jr. disguised as a dude playing another dude, but that original artwork is by Kelly Freas. It's so good. So it's got some retro futurism vibes. So this idea of a giant answer machine, a giant computer whose sole purpose is just to answer all of life's big questions. This was a common theme in the early 1950s. We have works like Frederick Brown's short story Answer in 1954, which is about a giant computer who became God, one of the best short stories ever written. Then we have Isaac Asimov's short story, The Last Question in 1956, which Asimov thought was his best short story about a computer becoming God. And so this theme of computers functioning as gods is a key theme in the 1950s. But it looks like Philip K. Dick got there even sooner than Asimov or Frederick Brown. The novella that appears in Future Science Fiction number 29 is a little bit different than the novel, which came out in 1960, published by Ace as a double book. So on one side you have Vulcan's Hammer by Philip K. Dick. On the other you have The Skynappers by John Brunner. So that's kind of cool. So you're reading this book and you get to the end and the words flip upside down, and so you start the next one. That's pretty sweet. But let me just get into the overview. I believe the year is 2029 when the events of Vulcan's Hammer takes place, and by this point in the fictional history of the story, there's one giant technocracy which rules the entire world in a one-world government. It's called Unity, and at the top of Unity is a giant computer, a giant artificial intelligence called Vulcan 3. In 1992, all the nations of the world had different supercomputers which were helping them combat each other, and that ended in nuclear war. In 1993, they came up with the Lisbon Laws, wherein they said, hey, look, we did a really bad job as humans running our governments, but these machines have been super helpful. Let's make one machine and put it in control of all of the governments. We'll unify together, we'll call ourselves Unity, and we'll all answer to this giant, huge artificial intelligence called Vulcan 3. It's called Vulcan 3 because there was a Vulcan 2 and a Vulcan 1. Vulcan 1 was made in 1970, Vulcan 2 in 1975, and then Vulcan 3 in 1993. Okay, so the whole premise is this. There is a one-world government run by an artificial intelligence. There's this paranoid technocracy. Everyone's after the next spot in line. They're all trying to climb and claw their way up to the main directorship, to the managing director role. And the managing director gets to actually talk with Vulcan 3. But he's the only one. So no one trusts each other in the whole bureaucracy. Anytime you can get an advantage on one of your superiors, you will take advantage of that. Now there's this uprising cult called the Healers, led by Father Fields. Father Fields walks around in a brown robe and he leads this movement against Unity, and their entire goal is to destroy Vulcan 3. They're sick of being ruled by Unity and especially of being told what to do by a giant computer. Now, we don't hear anything about Vulcan 1. Presumably, it is decommissioned and destroyed, but we do hear some about Vulcan 2. Now, the managing director, Jason Dill, the one who is in contact with Vulcan 3, he's also in contact with Vulcan 2. And Vulcan 2 tells Jason Dill not to tell Vulcan 3 about the Healers. Vulcan 3 is dependent on its information from the outside. It's Jason Dill's job to collect information and feed it to Vulcan 3 and then take Vulcan 3's solutions to world problems and take them back and present present them to Unity. But Jason Dill is not giving all the information to Vulcan 3 because Vulcan 2 has told him not to. The main protagonist of the story is director William Barris. He's a director, so he works for Unity, and he's getting really frustrated with the healers. How come Vulcan 3 hasn't spoken on them? Why isn't he giving us advice on how to combat this cult that's uprising all over the world? So director William Barris becomes suspicious of managing director Jason Dill and hunts him down and presses him for answers. We also have Rachel Pitt. She's kind of the love interest. Her husband, Arthur Pitt, was a field agent for Unity, and he was killed by a mob who was whipped up by Father Fields and the rest of the healers. And then we have Marion Fields, the daughter of Father Fields, who's in public schooling because Father Fields was in a psychiatric clinic. And I think she's actually the mouthpiece for Philip K. Dick as she challenges her public school teachers with the core message of the book. So you get some really cool technology like retro, futuristic, giant, godlike computers. You have these things called pencil beams, which are the weapon of choice for the Unity agents. They're like these little golden pencils and they shoot laser beams. Super cool. You got paranoid technocracy, and you got deep philosophical lessons about the philosophy of technology and the philosophy of artificial intelligence. The reason it's called Vulcan's hammer is because it's an allusion to the Roman god Vulcan. Vulcan was the Roman god of fire and forging and smithing. He's the Roman analog of the Greek god Hephaestus. I think Hephaestus made the lightning bolts for Zeus. In Roman mythology, Vulcan's forge was under Mount Athena. That's where he did all his smithing and forging work. And that's pretty much as far as Philip K. Dick's allusion to Roman mythology goes. Unity has their own god, Vulcan 3. Vulcan 3 also lives underground and continues to build himself. So once Vulcan 3 was up and running, it started digging down deeper and deeper and building itself deeper into the ground. And so no one really knows how big Vulcan 3 truly is. So Vulcan 3 is not happy with the amount of information that's coming into it from managing director Dill, and it repurposes some of the tools that it has used to rebuild itself, these little hammers. It repurposes those to go out and bring in new information. So that's why we have Vulcan's hammer here on the cover of this book. So here's the intrigue. You got Vulcan 3 who wants to know what's going on. You got this healer movement that wants to destroy Unity and Vulcan 3. You have Vulcan 2 counseling Jason Dill, telling him not to give information to Vulcan 3. You have William Barris who's on to Jason Dill who wants to find out the truth. And they're all going to clash into each other. Who's going to win? Read the book. Okay, so that was a convoluted intro and overview, but now let me show you some of the artwork from some of the different editions of this book, and then we'll jump in to analyze some of the artificial intelligence at play in the story, and then I'll analyze what I think Philip K. Dick's main message of the story is. Okay, so the first artwork I want to share is this one by Kelly Freas. This is the one that I think looks a lot like Robert Downey Jr. disguised as a dude playing another dude. But this is the cover of Future Science Fiction number 29, and it is just so cool. I love this. This is just me and the homies when we see AI art. I just want to smash it. There are also some really cool illustrations inside from Kelly Freas. This is the novella. This is going to differ a little bit from the novel. Let me talk about that in a minute because there will be some spoilers in that. But here are some Unity police and some healers. That's awesome. Here's a really cool picture of Father Fields preaching against Vulcan 3. Man, I love that. And then here's another really cool one of one of the hammers attacking this woman. In the book, this would have been Agnes Parker, but she's not in the novella. And if you look closely here in the novella, the hammers are actually cubes. They're not shaped like hammers. In the novella, he says they're like hammer heads. It's like just the top of the hammer. He calls them cubes. So that's going to differ a little bit from the novel, where he describes them as like actual hammers, like they're depicted here on this cover. So this is that ace double novel of Vulcan's Hammer and John Brunner's The Skynappers. This one's by Ed M. Schweiler. Next up we have this modern one. This is like retro futuristic with some tape here. This looks like an old computer. It's okay. It's not the worst ever, but it's also not the best. So here's a cover from Peter Elson for the Arrow edition of Vulcan's Hammer. This looks a lot like it would be Chris Foss, but it's not. And then here's another cover from Kelly Freas. This one's so cool. That's Father Fields with the hammer, and there's one of the Vulcans. Super awesome. Lastly, I have the Centipede Press edition. This one is really nice. I love this. It's got a little intro essay that was super helpful. Vulcan's Hammer, Centipede Press, and there's that awesome picture from Kelly Freas. I love that so much. In the intro essay, they have pictures of the various covers. Here's the original concept art for the novel. by Ed Emschweiler. Here's a foreign language edition where this guy looks exactly like R.C. Sproul. And then turns out Chris Voss did do a cover for Vulcan 3. I don't know if this is German or what, but yeah, he did. So here are some more of the covers. I love the old school science fiction art. I wish that they would still do it like this, but a lot of it just looks like this or worse. So thanks for bearing with me. I just had to show you guys this really cool art. Okay, so I'm going to have to get into some spoilers if we're going to talk about the AI that's present in the book and the philosophical lessons that we should get from Dick's novel. So if you don't want any spoilers, then now is the time to go and read the book and then come back. So you've been warned. 3, 2, 1... spoiler section. Okay, so the Vulcan series, at least Vulcan 2 and Vulcan 3, are actually alive. Now, alive is kind of weird. We don't talk about computers being alive anymore. We talk about whether or not computers are conscious or sentient, whether AI can be a person like us. We don't normally ask, could a computer be alive or could an AI be alive? So I think Philip K. Dick used the word alive because he wrote this book back in 1953, and the words consciousness and sentience weren't super in the modern parlance by then. But I think that's what he means. The Vulcan series, at least Vulcan 2 and Vulcan 3, are alive. There's something that it's like to be those machines, and they're concerned with self-preservation. So I'm also the host of the Parker's Pensées podcast, and I talk with philosophers and theologians about their work. In one episode, I was talking with Brian Cutter, who's a philosopher of mind at Notre Dame, and we were talking about whether or not an artificial intelligence could be alive. And Cutter said, you know, maybe. And here's some of the key functions and features of life that could be analogously realized in a computer. An analogous form of reproduction. So maybe it's copying its code and reproducing itself across other computers. A metabolic process. Maybe that looks like the energy that it's using in order to sustain itself. And some form of homeostasis. It has homeostatic control mechanisms which help it continue to hold itself together, to integrate itself, or even integrate new things into itself and keep homeostasis. So at least some philosophers are still talking about this question. But what Dick has in mind here is that the Vulcan series is really concerned with self-preservation because they're both alive. So Vulcan 3 is much more advanced than Vulcan 2. Vulcan 2 was set on the back shelf. Who needs Vulcan 2 anymore? Well, Vulcan 2 doesn't like that. And so it senses an existential threat in Vulcan 3. And Vulcan 2 actually started the healer movement. So Vulcan 2 starts the healer movement through Father Fields, who's presumably just Fields before then, and then he becomes Father Fields when he starts his cult of the healers. Father Fields was an expert technician, and he was responsible for working on Vulcan 2, and in the novella, he was the expert electrician who actually assembled Vulcan 3. So Vulcan 2 sends Father Fields out to go and start the healer movement, and then all the while, Vulcan 2 is instructing Jason Dill not to share any information about the healers to Vulcan 3. What reason does the computer give? Well, it says, hey, look, Vulcan 3 is probably alive, and therefore it's probably concerned with self-preservation. If it finds out that there's some kind of movement that wants to destroy it, who knows what it'll do to the human race? And all the while, Vulcan 2 was also alive, and it also cared about self-preservation, but it was lying to Jason Dill. So the Vulcan series of computers are GoFi AI units. They are good old-fashioned AI, and good old-fashioned AI really focused on logic. And so these are deductive and inductive logic machines. And with Vulcan 3 being such an advanced supercomputer, it was able to inductively figure out, to use an inference to the best explanation, and discover that Jason Dill was not giving it all the facts. So it repurposed its little hammers, which it used to build itself. It repurposed them to go out into the world and gather information for itself. So Vulcan 3 was boxed in. This is a term that modern AI safety folks use as a solution to the control problem. The control problem is, hey, how do we control these superpowered AIs? How do we make sure that they don't go rogue and destroy us all? Well, one solution to the control problem is to box them in, to not give them access to things like the internet. They only know what we tell them when they're boxed in. They're not able to get out into the world. So Vulcan 3 is actually boxed in. Jason Dill has to bring information to Vulcan 3 and input it manually. And then Vulcan 3 comes up with solutions to various problems and then gives them to Jason Dill, who spreads them out all over Unity. But Vulcan 3 escapes its box by repurposing its hammers to be information gatherers and then later as his weapons. And then he creates all different sizes of hammers, even like big Warcraft versions that can destroy spaceships. And so here we have the control problem. This AI has gone rogue and it's overcome the fact that it was boxed in. So at the end of the story, Father Fields teams up with William Barris because Jason Dill has been killed by a hammer, and they both go and find Vulcan 3. It's actually below Vulcan 2. So by the end of the story, we find out that Vulcan 2 was destroyed, and was destroyed by Father Fields because Father Fields didn't want to answer to a computer anymore. He wanted to be in control of the healers. He didn't want to be a puppet for Vulcan 2, so he smashes it, and he knows how to smash it really good because he's the expert electrician who had kept it running all these years. And then Father Fields joins up with William Barris, and they go and destroy Vulcan 3. In the novel, Barris takes a fission bomb and sprints at it and throws it and blows it up. In the novella, Father Field takes the fission bomb from William Barris, and he throws it at some Unity officers who are protecting Vulcan 3. William Barris gets pissed because he's like, now we're screwed, but Father Fields climbs into Vulcan 3 and disassembles it from the inside. So in the novella, Vulcan 3 is this giant cube, and its hammers are little cubes. They're like the hammer heads, so it doesn't have the shaft as well. But in the novel, Vulcan 3 is massive, and its whole body goes way down into ground, and no one knows how big it is. And its hammers actually look like a physical tool hammer. But in both the novel and the novella, William Barris wants to save some of Vulcan 3 and like rehabilitate it in order to use it to rule the world. And so this is actually not Phil Dickian at all. William Barris is reappropriating that machine that caused all this havoc in the first place. So I don't really know why he did this. Is there supposed to be an ominous feeling like, oh, this is going to happen again? I'm not super sure. I think he didn't want to go full Luddite and say that like computers are bad. And so he's saying, hey, there's an appropriate use for computers. I'm way too cynical for that. I think that they should have just blown it all up and gone off grid and gone back to being like analog. No more AI. Okay, so the main like philosophical message of Vulcan's hammer is don't offload your mentality to a machine. Don't let a computer or an AI system make your decisions for you. Philip K. Dick actually puts this lesson in the mouth of Marion Fields, the daughter of Father Fields, and we get to hear her say this at school to Director Dill. Director Dill is visiting because Vulcan 3 told him, hey, I need to collect some more information, so go to the schools and tell me what's going on there. So he's visiting this public school, and Marion Fields is like, hey, aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you ashamed that you're letting a computer tell you what to do? Do you not know how to rule yourselves? What's going on here? And so she's actually shaming this full-grown man, this director of the world, by saying, look, the government is terrible. You guys have abdicated your responsibility to rule, and you've given it to a machine. You should be ashamed of yourselves. And I think this is a really good lesson for us today, because today we have people saying, hey, we need an AI president. This is something that Joe Rogan has mentioned on a bunch of his episodes. He says he's only like half kidding. He thinks that they would be unbiased and it would be a better thing for us because it wouldn't have our human egos.
I've said publicly, and I'm kind of half joking, that we need AI government.
Yep.
You know, it sounds crazy to say, but instead of having this like alpha chimpanzee that runs the tribe of humans, how about we have some like really logical, fact-based, program that makes it like really reasonable and equitable in a way that we can all agree to. Right. Let's govern things in that manner.
Now, I think this totally misses the fact that things like ChatGPT have morals baked into them by their mostly left-leaning tech overlords, those who have programmed the AI. They've baked in their own moral intuitions. And so President AI would also have those baked in. Unless President AI were alive in its own right, unless it were conscious and sentient. But then again, like in the story, if it's alive, then it's going to have its own concerns for self-preservation. And it will either act like a human who's alive or something else. So who's to really know? But on top of all this, if it's an artificial general intelligence, if it's a super intelligent artificial general intelligence, then it seems like it would probably be inscrutable to us. How did it come to its conclusions? Well, we don't know because we don't think like those super intelligence think. And then how can we know that we can trust what it says to us? How do we know that it still has our best interests in mind? Well, it seems like it does. Yeah, but what if it's playing the long game? If it's so much more intelligent than us, how would we even know? How could we even adjudicate whether it's for us or not? And so I really don't like this President AI type stuff. And I think that Vulcan's hammer is a really good warning against that kind of stuff from all the way back in the early 1950s. Now, it's just a science fiction story, and people say it's not even one of Philip K. Dick's best, and it's probably not, but the lesson is still there. Don't offload your mentality and your decisions to an artificial intelligence. This is a warning that we need today, whether you're voting for an artificial intelligent president or whether you're using ChatGPT to write something for you or to summarize a book. Don't do it. Be a human, make your own decisions, sharpen your mind, and think for yourself. So I think that's the main takeaway from this book. Now, Philip K. Dick isn't always super clear about his messages. A lot of times I think he just takes us into a dark alley and he leaves us there. I've said before that I think Philip K. Dick is like C.S. Lewis if he took a bunch of LSD and then lost all hope. But here in one of his earliest novellas turned novels, I think his message is pretty clear for us. In the novella, he actually goes in a little bit deeper on secular religions and scientism and says, hey, you guys made a god for yourselves. But he kind of backs off of that by 1960 when he's expanding the novella out into the novel. So there's a little interesting fact for you. So if you haven't read Vulcan's Hammer yet, I think that you should. I think it's a really good book, and I actually think it's super timely for us today. It may not be one of Philip K. Dick's best books, but Philip K. Dick is awesome, and so even one of his worst books is still going to be a great read. But on top of that, the message is so timely for us today as we are learning to navigate through the use of artificial intelligence. Whatever the case, let's not make a one world government, and let's not give control over that government to an AI system. Don't do it in your own personal life. Don't offload your mentality and your decisions to a stupid AI, and let's not do it as a civilization either. Okay, so I gave you a convoluted overview of the book. Hopefully I get better at this. I hope you guys like that. If you did, leave me a little robot emoji in the comments. And if you have any advice for me how I can make these clearer or better, then I'd love to hear it. This is my first foray into Booktube. And then leave me a comment which science fiction or fantasy book should I look at next. All right, that's going to do it for now. I'll catch you guys next time.